This is the Real Coaching Podcast. I'm Joel Filliol. Paulo, how's it going this week?
Good. How are you, Joel?
Not bad. Preparing for going to Sevilla, do a little conference there, do a talk, and then off to Paris the next week. Hopefully they will have recovered a little bit, but the conference seems to be going, so we'll look forward to seeing people from all over the world there. Are you coming, Paulo?
No, I'm going to skip this. It's a long way, and it's very expensive to get to Paris and do the conference. I'm a little bummed that I'm missing out, but it is what it is.
Well, if you're interested in hearing about Simon Whitfield's career, you might have some interest there. Happen to be doing the talk about Simon, so I'm thinking I might record it, might make it available to people that visit the website. So we'll see if I'm able to do that next week. Same with the one in Sevilla. Different topics. The one in Sevilla is about just high performance triathlon training. Maybe I did not use the words high performance, but top triathlon training. The other in Paris is about Simon's career. So the main topic today is going to be swimming. We've got a lot to talk about. We're going to dig up some stuff from the past in terms of back when blogs were a thing. And so we're going to talk about that, maybe swim myth busting. But first, I think we have to talk about the ongoing doping scandals. There was WADA meetings yesterday. There was talk about compliance and non-compliance, and obviously the ongoing stuff of Russia and the lab there being declared non-compliant, which we talked about on TRS Radio as well when we were on last week. But the shock of more countries, their labs being non-compliant, and it's not really clear what that means in some cases. But obviously these labs that do the testing for the either whether the in-country anti-doping or for specific competitions or requested via WADA, they need to follow certain procedures. They need to be accredited, and that seems to be that there are many that are they've not done something, whether it's as simple as tick boxes or whether there's something more fundamentally wrong. But it's quite worrying, isn't it?
Yeah, I was a little surprised by the tone coming out of those meetings, which was basically an organization that let's not forget that none of this this conversation would not be happening if it wasn't for the reporter from ARD doing the documentary about doping in Russia and doping in Kenya. So basically, WADA was sleeping at the wheel and not taking any action, and somebody from the outside shone light on issues that WADA had to know that they existed and never did anything about it. And yesterday the tone was a little like, guys, we missed this, but we're going to get it right from now on. And so that was a little concerning. The second thing that I thought was concerning was that the tone and what he's saying moving forward, it's more about the bureaucracy working than things that really are going to have a big impact on clean sport. So basically, I got the impression that they're very committed to cleaning up the mess that they're in, but I'm not sure if this is going to have any impact on sport in general, because you have to look at like I said on Twitter yesterday or on Wednesday, Ukraine was one of the non-compliant athletes, but every weekend or every month there's Ukrainian athletes winning races. What does that mean? Not being compliant doesn't mean anything. Doesn't change sport in any way. And so I was definitely concerned from what I heard from yesterday.
Indeed, and we'll link to the ARD documentaries. I mean, they're certainly worth a watch. I think they're originally in German, but they've been translated or subtitled. There's one on the Russian athlete. I think it was a doping control officer that led on to the what was actually happening, and then there's another one in Kenya and how easy it is to get drugs in Kenya, and that was the other country bizarrely not even mentioned, and yet we know there's currently a scandal in several layers. One of them is about Nike money and the leaders there seemingly absconding with payments, but then also that they really don't have a national anti-doping organization and of any substance, it seems.
Yeah, absolutely. So the list of non-compliant countries doesn't include Kenya, and then they make a small reference to Kenya, but basically Kenya has no anti-doping agency, has no testing in place, and so that's the highest grade of non-compliance right there. And let's not forget that they have very good athletes in track and field that are just dominating the sport. So makes me think that going back to London 2012, if the Russian athletes plus the Kenyan athletes plus the Turkish athletes are all suspicious, or the Moroccan athletes are all suspicious, then the results are all a farce, and I think that a lot of care is being taken care around the subject with Kenya, when I think that the trouble with Kenya it's probably larger than the problem with Russia, and maybe not as attractive to prosecute since the Western world has a different relationship with Russia than they have with Africa.
Yeah, I mean, if it turned out that there was widespread doping in Kenya, it would the star of distance running. It may be the same if it was sprinting in Jamaica. If that came under scrutiny, which it has. There's some interesting people to follow on this topic if you want to dig deeper into it, including the former, I think it was a doping control head of Jamaica, who got outed and now has lots of interesting things to say. There was some interesting comments, and I posted something on Twitter about this. But it seems like that, of course, the athletes are, as always, on the front line to be punished should they transgress as they ought to be. But obviously, we're seeing that the problem goes straight up the chain, and I mean, there's if the labs are not accredited or corrupt, and the people above that, we're seeing the head doping control officer of the IAAF. Apparently corrupt, and even the presidents of these federations. I mean, it doesn't give you a lot of faith in the entire system, does it?
No, there's really no faith in the system with all those things, and the Kenya problem is like huge. There's people out there that want to discuss if a 2-hour marathon is possible. I want to discuss if a 2-hour 5 marathon is possible. And we've passed like 2:05 like a long time ago. It's a huge problem, and I hope there's a solution, and I hope there's a retroactive solution, because, like you said, athletes are in the forefront of this problem, and clean athletes are taking the brunt of this problem. Clean athletes are out there just getting their asses kicked by these cheaters, and something needs to be done about it.
Speaking of that, on the front page of Let's Run, which we're known to visit, there was a quote from Malindi Elmore, who's a 1,500-meter runner for Canada, now retired, who goes into some detail. There's quite a nice article linked to the quote from Malindi, but basically that she has missed out on 2 Olympics. 1,500-meter women is one of the the events with the most disqualifications and subsequent drug busts. But even to the point of the standards in her case that Canada set were based on what was believed to be top 12 times, but they're based on times that run by athletes who were doping and proven doping, and yet she was sort of stuck in the system where the doped up times pushed her out of qualifying. It shows how deep it goes and how many athletes it can affect.
Yeah, and most importantly, it's a system with their A+ standard. It's a system that is pushing athletes into doping, basically, because when you have a standard that's even tighter than the IAAF standard, especially in a country where there's been some good 1500-meter runners, Canadian runners, but basically even now they're going to be a product of the U.S. system. They're usually not a product of the Canadian system. So whenever you have standards that are very hard to meet, there's extra motivation for doping. So, but if we're going to go down the discussion about talking about the Canadian system on the podium and all that stuff, then we're probably going to spend a lot of time here.
Maybe if we've got some Canadian listeners, they can put in some requests. If we get enough requests, we can go deep into that one. But
if we're forced to talk about it, then we'll do it, huh?
Sure, whatever the listeners want. But it's obviously sort of painful to be seeing all this, but at least it's happening. And again, thanks to the various whistleblowers that were involved to actually put this out into the open, because it's far worse that it's happening and nobody knows about it than it is now. At least some light is being shown on it.
Yeah, at least that.
So we'll move on. Before going into our swimming topic, we had quite a good discussion about polarized training. Some follow-up, some questions. So I thought we could answer a few of those, get into a few of those. It's a topic that's of interest to a lot of people, and maybe a bit confusing as well. But a few questions we can briefly go into. One of them referenced ultra short repetition training. Are you familiar with this US RPT concept?
Yes, I'm familiar with it. Yeah.
And the question is really just comparing this model to polarized training and where it might fit in the big picture of planning.
Yeah, I'm sure you also read the let's call it white papers on ultra short race pace training. I'm not too impressed. It's I think that when scientists go off the rails, that's more dangerous than regular people. I think that US RTP RPT is a nice piece of pseudoscience where basically they or that person comes out and says, like, given this paper that shows that A is true, then what I think, which is B, is also true, and things are not as linear as that. I'm sure that I've read about it. I used some of it. I implemented some sets, and my experience with it was not very positive. Basically. As you can imagine, the magic of swimming shorter distances at a pace, and then that magically translating into longer distances is just not the way it works. So definitely, I'm not a fan of the ultra short stuff. I can see it working with sprinters, but what worries me is the amount of intensity that it requires is makes me question the sustainability of such a program, and I'm pretty sure that it came up with a little bit of a fad. I don't think it had a lot of traction, and I don't think there's anything there.
Yeah, I mean, we talked in the Polarized podcast about the costs of high intensity and the biomechanical implications of that, and the sustainability of it. And I think that's really kind of more of the same, whether you call it high intensity, short intervals, whatever name you want to call it. It's the same sort of risks, and ultimately while the stimulus is strong, it's about more than that. So moving on, the next question that kind of came up a lot was really how to organize polarized training, and I think this is where getting into triathlon makes it interesting, going with three sports together. But a really implementation of this, and I mean, I think we could make it as simple as how many high intensity sessions versus low intensity sessions.
Yeah, I think that the first thought that you have is, okay, so I'm going to go with polarized training for swimming, biking, and running. That means I'm going to have 2 or 3 intensity sessions for each of the sports. That means I'm going to have 6 to 9 sessions. I only have 7 days where I'm going to put all these sessions, and obviously that's not the way to do it. I remember when I started in triathlon, I bought the first edition of the Triathlon Training Bible, and or the Triathletes Training Bible. I can't remember. And it was a little bit like that, where there were so many choices, so many intensity sessions that you had to do, that the puzzle of putting them together was almost impossible. As an answer to your question, I think that where polarized training comes in, particularly when applied to triathlon, is under what I would call like a block periodization context, where basically you use the polarized training for a specific block in a specific sport, and you're going to just use that approach just for one sport, and probably keeping the other sports or the remaining sports with a more traditional approach. I think I said in the other podcast that I feel that polarized training applies really well to bike training. I also think that it applies decently well to swim training. I think I much prefer more traditional approaches to run training than a polarized approach. So basically, I would say that let's not go down the trap of trying to go full on polarized training and in the end having 6 to 9 intensity sessions a week, but just apply it in a way that you know that you're going to be able to get the most out of it.
I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, if you when you're thinking across the three sports, if you imagine if you have 6 to 9 high intensity sessions, and with that definition of 90% and above, then that can be quite difficult to do sustainably. If we were to really simplify it down, we could say do 1 to 2 high intensity sessions per week per sport rather than more. But I think the way that you're talking about as well, and blended into another question, was like, well, when should this happen? And there are different times of the year, and the concept, is this like a year-round thing, or should it be pre-racing, or is it in race? And that that's another question coming from both the research point of view, but coming back to implementation as coaches. How do you use these concepts? And as well, you highlight the difference between the sports, and perhaps not doing them all at the same time. Again, coming back to sustainability, where we talk about and we know how important consistency is in training, and consistency requires to be able to recover well and to be able to do the level of workload that you want over the period of time. And if you're trying to do too much in high intensity, we know that can interfere with that. And in fact, you can sometimes not be able to recover or not even hit the intensities and therefore get the stimulus that you desire. So thoughts on where you would put this in the year plan if you were to implement it?
I think that anytime that you're using high intensity training and with 2-3 sessions a week, I definitely feel that when you're working with that approach, it's definitely at a time of the year where you're trying to make very specific gains in one sport. So basically, I would say that if you're cycling, needs you need to step up with your cycling. Definitely a polarized approach for a block of 6 to 8 weeks. Let's say that you started your season at the beginning of December. If you're doing that kind of stuff around January, February, I think that's the best way, the best time of the year to put it, because as racing season approaches, I think that going for a more traditional approach that is based on specificity and on a round race pace, let's call it that, I think it's best. And like I said, in the context of triathlon, I feel that this kind of thing is more applied to swimming and cycling, and I feel that I much prefer with running to just be a lot more conservative and not extremely high intensity sessions on the run.
I mean, it's one of the risks of these schemes and models is you can overthink things, can't you? And when at the end of the day, we're trying to be consistent. We're trying to manage a good chronic training load. If there's a mistake that people make, it's doing too much of the high intensity or over focusing on the intensity part and forgetting that doing the 80%, the 80 easy or low intensity is actually really important. And if you have less of the higher intensity, then in practicality, that's actually probably the way it's meant to be in terms of this model. That it's actually less than 20%, or at least if you consider it via sessions or via time. Perhaps sessions is maybe a better model, but really at the end of it, as well, one of the studies that we linked to last week was talking about traditional periodization is actually pretty good, and it gets very good results. And and I think with the interest, obviously these kind of labels, they get people interested, they get people thinking about it. We've talked about both of how it's got us thinking about how we work and the use of intensity, the distribution. But also there's a reason why so many training protocols and ways of doing things have lasted many years, and in this case that traditional periodization is effective in many cases. I mean, we could talk about what that is I think another discussion. However, as you alluded to, doing these. A high intensity block, particularly on cycling, coming out of a more basic or foundational phase, and then going into specific training may be very effective. When I typically don't sort of think in these kind of models, like applying what label am I doing, what am I doing, but in practicality that certainly sounds like more like what I'm thinking, and in particular. It's the duration of this kind of work and this kind of focus, and I tend to think that there's different times of year where you use intensity, and usually it's less, again, it's less than you think in terms of the stimulus, and just because the repeatability of, more than 6 or 8 weeks is very difficult of any sort of, high intensity work. It's again, coming back to the sustainability of it. So that's, where you might put it in the year, and thinking, in different contexts of how you use that across the 3 sports. I tend to agree that, high intensity with running, due to the much increased biomechanical load is riskier, and you got to evaluate whether that risk is worth it.
Yeah. One thing that would, like, a very simple example that I would give is if you're a runner, let's say an elite runner that has 10 to 14 weekly sessions, for even for an elite runner, they wouldn't think of doing more than 3 intensity sessions a week. So when you're a triathlete, and there's a lot of triathletes out there, both age groupers and professionals, that are doing 10 to 14 sessions a week, just think about your whole program as a program that's going to have 3 intensity sessions a week for the combination of swim, bike, run. So basically, when you're designing your program or thinking about your training, you're going to have to think like something's got to give here. So maybe if you're doing 2 intensity sessions on the bike, maybe you only have one left. Maybe you only have one left on to put it on the swim or the run. So basically, what I would say is, if you're looking for applying polarized training to your triathlon training, you need to think that something's got to give, and you're going to have focus on one discipline, and the other discipline have different kind of focuses that are going to be away from what you might think of like the traditional of like, oh, I need to have 2 intensity workouts a week.
I mean, that's a great way of thinking about it. And I like the looking at, comparing it to a single sport. And, of course, there's no way that a single sport athlete could do so many intensity sessions as many triathletes try to do. There's many resources available on the internet. I mean, I think you've looked at the Canova stuff. Renato Canova, who's got various plans from some of the athletes he works with. He's an Italian coach who spent a lot of time in Kenya and had various coaching positions, and he's published some of the plans, and typically they don't work necessarily on a 7-day cycle, so and that allows them to spread out even more, so even less intensity. I mean, obviously the 7-day cycle is somewhat arbitrary, perhaps more difficult to implement that a longer weekly microcycle in a multi-sport than a single sport, but that's even more spread out, and and again, that's, I think, as you said, like being able to actually execute this, you end up with a lot of easy sessions, which if you look at the typical pro programs of athletes that are doing a lot of volume or a lot of work, and basically that's all they do: eat, sleep, train. There are some key quality sessions. But the majority is obviously easy and or lower intensity. And when we see sometimes age group athletes who have much less time to train, and they fill it all with sessions with work pieces or intensity pieces, then things can start to go wrong. And that was another question, is kind of bringing it back to implementation for age group athletes.
Oh, you wanted to talk about that? We already talked about that a little bit. Basically, for age group athletes, don't think too much about like putting all sessions, all intensity sessions, and just work more on the consistency, on the low intensity, and then make the quality sessions count.
Yeah. I think that, we did cover it last time, and I think there's still some questions about it. So I think we've hit that again. But obviously, it's something that resonates with people thinking about planning. I guess it's why you hire a coach that's got some experience with it. But it's good to get thinking about how you distribute this stuff. So I think moving on to our main topic. swimming myth busting. We were gonna start to reference the all-time classic, I might say. In 2012, I wrote the top 20 rules for faster triathlon swimming, which immediately resonated. So I looked up. This is on my now defunct Blogspot page, and I looked. It has 86,000 page views, which dwarfs by, you can imagine, some magnitude everything else on there. So I think it resonated with the time, and it still gets page views. And where and well, obviously we'll reference this, but listed some, rather, I suppose it's unconventional. Is it unconventional? I don't know. Maybe I don't know what the convention is, but it's certainly not total immersion type swimming, which has kind of had a lot of mind share in triathlon, and without going into that deeply, this is contrary to that school of thought. And so I thought we could revisit some of these principles, and I think some of these, when I read them today, my feelings have evolved as I'm sure yours has. It's quite interesting to. This blog references a post of a previous 5 years, 2007, and then links to a blog post of yours, which we'll also link to. And I guess it's because there's just so much BS about swimming, and it just seems to be something that attracts people. Look, shortcuts. It attracts people selling shortcuts. There's various people that just don't simply want to put in the time, as maybe they don't enjoy it. Maybe there's different reasons why. But there's a lot about triathlon swimming out there that just simply doesn't work. And so how about we roll through a few of these? I think that's a good starting
say
what
point.
You think. So, top 20 rules for faster triathlon swimming, and number one is conditioning trumps drills, and basically I say technique matters. However, the way that most athletes try to improve technique doesn't work.
Yeah, one of the articles that we're going to put on the show notes is going to be an article with some really good quotes from Katie Ledecky's coach, and one thing that he says is, "We don't do drills unless you consider 10 by 100 a drill," and that made me chuckle when I read it, because a lot of times I that's what I say. It's just we don't do drills. I don't use drills. I might use something that I would call isolation drills to just get a point across, to explain something, but pretty quickly we revert back to complete stroke, with or without constraints, and we can talk about that later. But most of the times, and here's why, because, and I know this is your experience as well. It's just I started when I started coaching on deck and having swimmers that I could work with on a daily basis, and this was a long time ago. I might have started with all the stuff that I was taking out from the internet, and the late 90s were when total immersion started to pop up, and I started using drills and a lot of the total immersion approach, and guess what? It wasn't having any impact on my swimmers. It wasn't making them faster. Some of my swimmers were getting very good at doing the drills, but they were not. It wasn't translating into their swimming, and more I started figuring out that the drills are not connecting with a complete stroke, and a lot of times make the swimmers become very good at the drills, and that's not the goal that we have.
That we're rolling into number two, which traditional drills don't work. But coming back to the blending these two together, that you need a certain level of conditioning in order to swim well technically, in order to have good propulsion, you need a certain level of conditioning, and the way that you get in the pool and you do an hour of very, very slow drills or very isolated drills, and you never really develop the conditioning to be able to hold a good technique. That isn't a shortcut.
Yeah, fitness is important in endurance sports, and it's also important in swimming. So whenever you're selling to athletes that it's all about technique. No, it's all about technique and fitness, and most of the times, the technique that you build while building fitness is more important than the technique that you build without building fitness.
Yeah, I mean, coming back to the drills, they don't seem to actually change a lot of the things that they're meant to, but B, the breaking down motor skills into component parts is not the most current thinking as what the best way to improve these motor skills. When you reference whole skills or whole movement, focusing on one area in a whole movement rather than breaking down into component parts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was reading something about Dan Pfaff. About I think it was the short put, and he was talking about how they go over and over the complete motion, and then through several tools with video or with motion capture or stuff like that, then they just break it down and they give feedback to the athlete, but it's all about the whole motion.
So moving on, the number 3, swim more often. Frequency is the best way. And I mean, we can see that in practice all the time when we're working with athletes who want to improve swimming. Just going from swimming, say 3 times a week for maybe an age group athlete, or for elite athletes maybe going to some double swims. How powerful just getting in the water more often is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So no debate there. Longer mindsets was the next one, and perhaps that comes from seeing there's a lot of masters, a lot of triathletes swim in masters programs, and even some high level athletes that swim in a swim program. We see these workouts that just have a million different parts, and everything is very short. And then they go try to swim 4K straight steady or 1500 max steady. They haven't built the condition, and so the point of doing longer main sets is also a very powerful tool.
Yeah, I think that no triathlete has any problem in going for a 50-minute run, but doing a set that lasts 50 minutes is going to be horrifying for most people, and that kind of thinking needs to change. Obviously, a bread and butter session that I do with my athletes is just a 1 hour set. That's going to be an endurance based set, but that's going to be like around 1 hour and with short rests, and a lot of times that's the bread and butter where it's the equivalent of an 1 hour cruise, or that's what I call my endurance intensity, but that's equivalent of a 1 hour run. If a 1 hour run is not a problem for you, if doing a 1 hour and a half bike is not a problem for you, then doing a 1 hour training set in the pool it should not be a problem for you either.
And particularly for time-limited athletes, get the most of your, the most from your training. You don't be at the pool for 2 hours. You can get a lot done if you have, long main sets and short rest. I mean, bread and butter for us might be, 10 400s, 12 400s, 4 or 5 800s, that kind of stuff. And you can mix them up in what you're doing with them. But the point is that you're getting that aerobic stimulus, and it's continuous work for a longer duration rather than very chopped up. So another one was about thinking about stroke, and the comment was don't overthink it, don't underthink it, and it's just talking about being engaged with what you're doing, but obviously you want to graduate to that becoming automatic, and there has to be sort of a balance of engagement thinking without overdoing it, and eventually it becoming about rhythm and flow.
Definitely. If your stroke is all about you have to be fully engaged in order for your stroke to work, then it's going to be very hard for you to be fully engaged for a complete training session. And more importantly, when you're racing, where there's a lot of distractions that keep you away from being able to completely focus on your stroke. So basically, you have to have a stroke that obviously you might be focusing on a few fundamentals, but at the same time, it cannot be a stroke that you have to focus on every single aspect of it in order to work.
The next one that was up was increased swim fitness translate to the bike and run, and I think this might have been in response at the time. There was a kind of a popular program going around that didn't include any swimming in the winter, and reflecting on how for probably the majority of athletes that might be short-sighted, because a triathlon is a complete race. If you're overly fatigued because you've skipped 3 or 4 months of conditioning, then that might have a negative effect on the race. It's perhaps self-evident, isn't it?
I don't know how self-evident it is. I actually would disagree with you that I think that very few people understand the connection between swim fitness and overall race performance, and you see a lot of athletes that think, well, I can survive the swim. If I can survive the swim, then I'll be done with it, and I can just get on the bike and get on the run and just get on with it. And but swim fitness has a lot to do with how you're going to be performing on the bike and run. So basically, what you want is to have a good swim fitness that allows you to swim without that effort having a huge impact on the rest of your race. Sometimes you see people in Ironman races that are coming out of the water completely drained and just extremely tired from the effort. And even if they have good bike and run fitness, the draining effort that they did for whatever time it took them to complete the swim is going to have impact on the rest of their race.
I mean, I've often thought that swimming is the foundation really in elite programs. I mean, it's the thing that you can do when you're very fatigued. You can do when you're you might be sore and fatigued cycling or running, but you can always come back to swimming. And I think it's a good sort of foundational thing, certainly in ITU racing and preparation, but I think increasingly in Ironman it's very, very important to swim well enough to be in the mix out of the water, and that you're having much more control over the race that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but we might skip over a couple of these. There's 20, and we've got other topics. But another one that was coming up was perhaps related to the total immersion part, was the counting the strokes and whether this has any validity. What's your opinion on that?
Well, the whole total immersion approach and the counting the strokes, as you know, takes athletes to adopt a stroke with a lot of positive propulsion, and that's the opposite of what you're trying to do. So basically, what you're trying to do is to have no pauses in propulsion, because you want to minimize the time that you are not accelerating forward. And with total immersion, basically, and even if you look at the videos of the total immersion role models, they're basically accelerating and decelerating, and obviously that takes a lot more effort. So even if it might look more smooth, it looks apparently easier, you're basically putting a lot more work to keep the same pace. So what happens with most age group athletes, if you put them and tell them, let's count strokes, what starts to happen is that they start to glide excessively and going slower, and that's not the goal we have. What you're trying to do is just eliminate the pauses in your stroke, eliminate the time that you're not putting force in the water.
I mean, and this rolls into number 15 on this list, which is actually learn to swim with a higher stroke rate, and and that's with the knowledge that open water conditions, and you're surrounded, by many other athletes in many cases. You can't necessarily use a stroke that, is more about distance per stroke. And the conditions, whether it be, chop or waves, sometimes also make it very difficult. And really the optimal open water stroke is one with a high stroke rate, and often quite a short stroke as well to achieve that. But the point there was that, yes, it's very different than what it doesn't translate from counting strokes in the pool and that long stroke. And in fact, you've got to train this. It takes conditioning to be able to swim with what you might consider to be an open water stroke.
Yeah, the high stroke rate swimming is just a product of you trying to minimize the pauses in propulsion. And one thing that's interesting is that, the goal with triathlon swimming is being a very good swimmer in open water, and the adaptation to high stroke rate is going to be is an adaptation to open water swimming. One thing that you can analyze is if you pick some video of the top swimmers in the world, you're going to see that some of them, especially for the longer distances, are going to have really long strokes and have more of a catch-up timing. But if you get some video of the top open water swimmers in the world, those guys have a high stroke rate, and they're always stroking. Why? Because in open water, it's a situation where drag goes up, and if drag goes up, then drag goes up, that means that the more you stop your stroke, the more you're going to be slowing down. So what you want to do is have a stroke that eliminates the pauses in propulsion, and eliminating the pauses in propulsion, the consequence of that is increasing your stroke rate. If you're just going to increase your stroke rate just for the heck of it, just because you think you're going to be faster, it's probably not going to be working for you if those pauses in propulsion are still going to be there.
So when we say the pauses in propulsion, when in practicality that means, from entry to high elbow catch position can take a long time. It can be very delayed, can it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, with my athletes, I'm always stressing no glide. You stretch your arm and you start your stroke right away. You stretch your arm, you start your stroke, and most of the times, what happens is that they increase the intensity of their swimming, and then what I tell them is just like, no, let's work on just eliminating that pause, eliminating the glide, and maintaining training intensities, maintaining the intensity that you're swimming at, and it usually takes a while for it to happen, but the athletes eventually get it. Of course, like one way of achieving this is also using toys that are going to increase drag, and when you have toys that increase drag, then what's going to happen is if you pause your stroke, then you're just not going to be moving forward, and that's a great way of learning a stroke with no pause in propulsion.
Yeah, and we'll move on to the toys in a second, but one part just on that that stroke rate is the ability to control the stroke rate as well. And I think this is one where we see, if you look at the front of an ITU race and you see Varga swimming nice and smoothly with a long stroke, and then you look further back and there may be shorter strokes. But also, you need to be able to, these guys that are in the front that are not getting knocked around, they can change their stroke and swim with a higher stroke rate when they need to, when they're in more mixed company, and when they can't swim with the longer stroke. So I think, for many athletes, it's not really an issue, but it's a bit of the problem of you can cherry pick sort of the best in various disciplines, but particularly in swimming, you cherry pick. Oh, look at that guy at the front with a beautiful long stroke, or equivalent on the women's side, and got to understand, how do you also actually swim in the pack, because it can also be different. But equally, the guys in the front, they have to be able to change it up.
Yeah, I mean, ugly swimmers or swimmers that appear to have a stroke that doesn't look very nice, they're the norm. They're not the exception. So basically, when you're looking at videos on YouTube where just like the most beautiful swimmer, and you're watching the most beautiful swimmer in action, that's probably not going to be you. That's never going to be you. So you need to find the stroke that's going to work for you, and not the stroke that works for the top swimmer, and that's going to be not pretty. And like you said, like Varga might look really nice in the water, but the norm even for the top swimmers is that they're not very pretty. I mean, you've seen the Brownlees swim in a pool, and they're really far from being pretty swimmers with long loping strokes.
No, I mean, they're a great example because they're actually quite ordinary in the pool. I mean, there's many athletes who, pool-wise, are much quicker. However, they really have, whether it's deliberately or not, but they do is up for debate. But they really do have excellent open water ability, and part of that is that choppy, powerful stroke. And there's other elements to the aggression and the confidence with which they swim, but they do have really exceptional open water swimming compared to pool swimming, and that's apparent when you can watch, if you've been able to watch them train, as I have, and I know you have as well. But what do you think about tempo trainers for training stroke rate?
Yeah, I was kind of like thinking about tempo trainers earlier when I was saying that just increasing your stroke rate just for increasing it's not going to be the solution. Obviously, they might work for athletes that simply don't get the correct timing to swim, and you see that a lot of times, which is athletes that maybe they were influenced by Total Immersion a little too much, and they think that the correct stroke is a stroke where you're just gliding a lot and just taking very few strokes for length. I'm not a big fan of using the tempo trainer. I mean, I don't use a tempo trainer at all, just because I feel that it might give the athlete the impression or the hint or that what we're trying to do is just increase stroke rate just to increase stroke rate, and basically, for example, if you're increasing the stroke rate and you're still gliding in the front but you're shortening the stroke at the back, then it's just not going to work.
Yeah, it's training the wrong thing, or perhaps it's easy to miss the point. And the other part is as well as assuming that your stroke should be symmetrical, which is what has to happen with a tempo trainer. And for people that don't know, it's a metronome for swimming. You put under your swim cap and it beeps away, and you can set various frequencies. And you have to swim symmetrically, which may or may not be correct for each person. But also, I found it. I've experimented, but never systematically with everyone. But I found it somewhat artificial, and as you say, it can you can, like a lot of things, you can sort of cheat it by shortening the back instead of going to the catch earlier, or rushing the recovery, and which affects can affect the timing as well. So they're an interesting tool, but have to be used in an intelligent way with some feedback. Moving on to tools, band. This is number 11 on here. Use a band frequently and describe it at the time. The best swimming drill there is. Do short reps, a lot of rest at first. Propulsion and body position are potentially what can come from this. And we've talked about this since, and I think there's probably been an evolution, at least in my thinking. I know there has been in yours as well, with band use.
Yeah, I haven't been using the band, so pretty much for half of the 2014 season and for the whole of 2015 season, I haven't been using a band only swimming with any of my athletes, and I'm pretty happy with the results. I think that and as you know, over one of the things that I did during the off season last year at the end of 2014 was I decided to just go over my swim training and just change a lot of it, and just not change completely, but try to streamline it, try to focus on the things that I felt were the success factors, and shed the things that were just fluff and maybe they were not adding to a lot. And one of the things that was shed was the band only swimming, and I feel that the band only swimming works for shorter distances, and helps the athletes get the feedback on good pull mechanics and on the high elbow mechanics and all that stuff. But I think that the trade-off of using the band only is just the impact on body position that it's got, and I felt that it was hurting more than was helping. So I just got rid of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still using band only swimming. I think with the group that I've got, when they've done it for a while, like anything, there's kind of diminishing returns. I think particularly in the early season, we do some of it once there's enough condition there. But I think the concept to use drag is still very valid. The risk of swimming with a very poor body position is perhaps what you're getting at, and using the band with the pull buoy and using paddles as well at the same time can be a way to address that. But too much of that, then it might actually be counterproductive. And I think the concept of drag is probably worth expanding on more. You highlighted that it gives you awareness of pressure on the hand, pressure on the front end, and perhaps allow you to achieve that earlier. Of course, there's other ways to do that. Parachutes or other, dragging sponges or towels with various devices. There's various other ways to achieve drag, and I think you've used the parachute as well.
Yeah, I think that I could have put this into my athletes, just, hey guys, I got good news. I got rid of the band only swimming, and the bad news is we're going to start using parachutes. And so basically, a lot of, well, not a lot of the same work that we were doing with band only, but basically we switched to using parachutes a lot, and I much prefer the work with the parachute because it allowed me either through the athletes kicking or swimming with a parachute and pull buoys at the ankles, which is a little bit of toy overload, but it works very well to just preserve horizontal position. So basically, if you thought that swimming with a band was hard, go out and try to swim with a parachute.
So the concept again that you have your body position is better with a pulling drag than it might be with the band. I have to say it for very top level swimmers, of course, they swim with a very nice body position even with the band. It has minimal impact on them, which is a little unfair to some of the others, in the pool. But yeah, that's an interesting concept of perhaps strengthening the scapular control and being able to hold that high elbow position where you can engage your lats. I mean, that's really what we're talking about here is the tools to be able to strengthen that area and have it engage in the right way to hold water or push water.
Yeah, definitely. One thing that's always on my mind when working with a large group or when you're trying to learn lessons from athletes is learn lessons from the athletes that have to make the improvements that are a long way from being at the level. For example, you coach Carolina Routier, I coach Summer Cook. I'm pretty sure that you and me were not learning a lot from what works from those two women, which are excellent swimmers. It's going to be when you, and this is more for the coaches now. It's you're going to learn what works when you're making progress with the athletes that really need to improve. And that was a little bit behind the thinking that I had when I changed the whole approach. Was just like, this is what worked with the athlete that had to make more progress and that made that progress. So yeah, that's the message there.
And it brings an interesting, sort of side point, because we often see, perhaps excellent swimmers themselves who become coaches, become sort of put on a pedestal of, teaching swimming. And in many cases, they may not have had to struggle in the same way. I mean, certainly taking from a coaching point of view, what you just said is, look at what works with the athletes that haven't been swimming since they've been, 5 years old or don't have a natural feel for the water or aren't great motor learners. Look at works for them, because that's actually the majority, isn't it?
Yeah, that's going to be the stuff that's going to be more effective across the board, and also, account for individuals, which is there's always going to be personal preferences, and if you're working with something that a particular athlete doesn't like or can't adapt to, then you don't have to force things too much. One thing that I think also made a big difference with the way and I think made my thinking about swimming progress in the last 2 or 3 years was also a little bit of a concept that comes from block periodization, which is a bit of focusing on less skills or on less capabilities, and go about it in a more let's call it intense way, or in a more directed way. And I think this kind of concept works really well with swimming, where you see, and I've made that mistake as well, which is you have a training week and you have 5 or 6 sessions, and then day 1 is paddles, day 2 is poo buoy, day 3 is this toy, day 4 we're doing long repeats, day 5 we're doing short repeats, day 6 we're doing VO2 max intervals. You try to just do a lot of different things at the same time. And one thing that changed with the way I'm thinking about swimming now is, how can we do a lot less things in a longer time? So basically is, if we have a block where we're working on horizontal position, then pretty much 80% of the work that we're doing is geared towards horizontal position. If we're doing a block where the focus is on I'm going to say distance per stroke, but I wouldn't call it like the traditional way of working distance per stroke. But if we're working on distance per stroke, then 80% of the work that we're doing is going to be focused towards distance per stroke. So the whole thing is reduce the number of things that we're working on and just go about it until the level of proficiency is high. And then once that is achieved, then we can move to the next thing that we're working on.
Simplify things down, I think, is a good concept. It's a universal concept. I think that's, I don't know, I think that's not one of the 20, but it's definitely captured in here in this list. And we haven't really talked about paddles yet. The use of paddles. On my list here, and still using them today in the same way as primarily a technical tool, but meaning that you can reinforce good mechanics if you have awareness on the hand of pressure. Also can be a muscular engagement or power tool if you use them for short, powerful efforts, or with a parachute or with a band, or with some sort of drag. That can be a different way to use them. And that's what we're doing now. And we have the athletes use typically flat paddles, slightly bigger than the hand. Sometimes we use different sizes, but slightly bigger than the hand, and usually with no wristband. And have experimented with the Finis agility paddles, which have only sort of a thumb grip. And I think those are interesting as well. I like those. I bought a bunch last year, brought them to camp and distributed them, and we've continued to use those throughout the year. So typically we mix them up, have two sets, for different reasons. But those paddles are very interesting because, of course, you have to press on the water in the more or less the correct way. You have to create that propulsion, otherwise they can slip. Provided you do that with a relaxed hand on the catch, because you can, like anything, find ways to cheat, which inevitably we do. We're good at finding the sort of the cheats in all this, not deliberately because the athletes are trying to, but you'll find the path of least resistance. So that's where obviously coaching and feedback comes into play. But what's your use of paddles these days?
Joel, I have very few missions in life, and one of my missions in life is one day I will find the perfect set of swimming paddles, and as such, my athletes have experimented with, I would say dozens of different paddles, and one day we'll find the correct set of paddles that's going to work on everything. I'm a big proponent of paddles. We use a bunch of different paddles, some that have been abandoned through the years that didn't work, some others stayed. As you know, I'm a fan of those agility paddles. I think they work really well with more proficient swimmers. Other paddles. I always try to look for paddles that are unconventional and see if they work. And one thing that I banned from my training group was the stroke makers, not because they're a bad product or they don't work, but because they don't particularly do anything to your stroke. They just what your stroke was before is the stroke makers are not going to change it. And I want a paddle that is going to change your stroke, and hopefully for the better. So basically if I use the agility paddles, is because I'm looking for them to just eliminate glide and keep a constant pressure on your hand throughout the stroke. If I'm using other, for example, like I like paddles that limit the amount of wrist flexion throughout the stroke, and we use those a lot. And why? Because those paddles change the way you swim. So when I'm looking for a paddle, I'm looking for a paddle that changes the way you swim. And a lot of times the traditional paddles are not going to change the way you swim.
So we've covered some of our top 20 here, and we've seen, I think most importantly, how some of these things have evolved in our practice. And, some of this, of course, is from directly working with elite athletes, but I think we can see a lot of these things, the same concepts apply. And in fact, I think that's the maybe one of the lessons that I know we would talk about is that this is not just about, elite swimming, that these concepts apply to any swimmers. And in fact, so much of what's out there just doesn't work, and having a different way of looking at swimming can really refresh and change and be that stimulus to change. And from the point of view of this isn't about one of these clinics where you get sort of the instant satisfaction of seeing your stroke rate change, but the reality of putting in the long periods of work, focused work, and the right kind of work can really change your swimming.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times I've had that experience where I'm working with an age grouper at the pool, and we're working on much of the stuff that we discussed today, and she comes back to me and says, "I'm really puzzled because this goes against a lot of the stuff that I learned before," and she was not very happy about it because what we were working on was so different from what she read on Triathlete magazine, and my answer that day was, I've been doing this for a long time, and my focus here is just on making people improve. I'm not selling a method. I'm not selling myself as like, oh, I'm like a swim guru. I'm not about having millions satisfied with my method. I'm focused on what works, what brings performance, and throughout the years, there were things that I tried out and they worked and I kept them, and there's things that didn't work and I've shed them from the way I do, and a lot of times when and you see that on the internet forums sometimes, like particular swim coach comes in and says like, oh, I got the method, I know how to do it, and it's I got the drills, I got the secret, and then there's nothing there, there's nothing there. So our approach is, or my approach, and I think it's your approach, is just like, hey, this is what years of experience and work have brought me, and I found out that a lot of the BS technique stuff that you read about doesn't really work, and I've learned that doing this kind of stuff with this kind of work, working this way, just focusing on a few different things at a time, it works really well. So that's where we're coming from with those 20 points, or with a lot of the stuff that we discussed today.
And that reminds me of the our post Dan Lorang show, where we were talking about sort of the top down approach. I think that's where it was. Learning from elite athletes, applying those principles. That's what real coaching is about. And and that is equally here. And even in very high levels of triathlon, we have athletes that don't have swimming backgrounds or don't have strong swimming backgrounds, and that's where this experience comes from, and reinforcing the that there is no shortcut here, that motor learning, these skills, it takes time, it takes repetition, it takes using different tools, but not using them as a crutch just to swim faster in the pool, but with a purpose, and structuring things in ways that perhaps simplify the progress that you can make, can be from a more simplistic approach, can be very, very effective, and trying to do everything at once and really overthinking it constantly, it may not be effective. So we could go on and on about swimming and implementation, but I think it was good to review it. It gets the wheels turning, and I'm looking forward to seeing the follow up from people when they hear this today. We'll put these links in. The Katie Ledecky article is quite good. A couple of these older blog posts as well. And if people have comments, then they can write in. Analysis this week: Ironman Arizona. That's not long past. Kessler really dominated, and I don't know if Lionel Sanders dominated, but certainly had an excellent performance.
Yeah, it was a bit of an unusual race in Arizona with the rain, and the weather was not very warm. So it was interesting to see that the kind of athletes that usually perform in the more hot, dry environments were not favored on that day. I think that the rain was a big factor in. There were some contenders that flattened on the bike, and that impacted their races. It was unfortunate to see. I was very curious to see what Sarah Haskins would be able to do in her first. I think was her first Ironman race, and she ended up having one or two flats and being out of contention early. And at the same time, the biggest favorite for the race, Brent McMahon, also had a flat and lost some time there, and then also that got him out of contention. I don't want to sound like some people that if it wasn't for the flat, you would have won the race, but definitely changed things a little bit at the top end of the men's race.
So it's interesting. I mean, this time of year, we see some athletes sort of on the rebound from disappointing Kona, and that might have been Kessler and Sanders. But also, more importantly, the drive for Kona the next year. We've seen these late season Ironmans, pretty solid fields, because it makes such a difference to get ahead for many of them in terms of the points, especially or primarily if they didn't have a good Kona. Because really, if you get a top 10 in Kona, then you're not set, but maybe set for the next year, without needing the points. So that remains a factor. I know we've talked about that before, but we've got Cozumel coming up still, and I'm with you. Hopefully we'll see Haskins. Not sure we'll get into another one this year, but it'd be nice to see her debut. I think would be nice to see the short course transfer. It's always interesting. And I think she could put together a very nice Ironman. So, yeah, there's more to go this season, the never-ending season.
Yeah, I think that what keeps athletes racing at this time of the season is just the particularities of the Kona ranking, and like you said, some are just trying to validate. And just so that next year they can focus on Kona, just without Ironman racing and without interruptions. And others that had disappointing races in Kona absolutely need the points from these races in order to give them a head start for next season.
Indeed. So, basically, so they can have a sensible plan for the next year without over racing or chasing points. So that's where it comes in. So, to wrap up, we'll put the links out for the anti-doping documentaries and for the swimming thoughts for our myth busting. Remind people that they can donate to the triathlon squad.
Oh yeah, that's a good reminder. We still have our donation drive going, so just to go to our Facebook page and there's a link there, or just go directly to the triathlonsquad.com/donate. And for our listeners in the US, the Triathlon Squad is a 501c3 non-profitable corporation, which means that your donations are tax deductible.
Very nice. And some sort of ranking in iTunes. I'm not sure that the ranking really matters to us, but we don't have any reviews, and many of the podcasts that are around us have many reviews. So we've been getting really nice feedback on email and on Twitter and Facebook. So that's nice. If somebody wants to leave a review, can't hurt. Tell your friends if there's coaches or really any athletes interested in performance, learning from what we're doing and from the discussions we're having. Tell your friends, share the word. The response has been great so far. And tell us if you want.
The response has been great. I'm really pleased with the way people are responding to the podcast, and so if you want to write an iTunes review and just just do it. I guess that elevates us on the ranking or whatever. But I just want people to listen to it.
Sure. I mean, I think the cause or what got us interested in, talking about real coaching and issues coaches face, but also athletes. I mean, we sort of have plenty of athletes that are listening, whether it be recreational or otherwise. Lionel Sanders got some tips before Arizona even. So
I think what he got from both of us was the key to his win at Ironman Arizona. Just trying to share the win here.
Probably sharing the win again. That comes up. So also, I'm getting some transcripts done to be released at the end of the year. If you are interested in those, you'd rather maybe have references to read some of this stuff. Might be good to digest it in being able to read it. Maybe it'll be on the Kindle. Who knows? Depending what the response is. Go sign up to the newsletter on my website. That'll be the way that'll be first distributed. I've got one, at least a few done now. I might kick one out for people that are subscribed to the newsletter. If you're interested in reading that, and we're investigating, looking where we go with that. Yeah, as a resource. So go to joelfilliol.com.
I just have a question. Can we go into the transcripts and eliminate all the obviously, and from the whole transcript? That would be amazing.
It also flattens out the accents, which I think we'll both be glad to hear, or not hear.
Yeah, your Scottish accent is terrible.
Oh, it's ridiculous, isn't it? But all right, it's been real.